Alright guys, so I'm going to start making videos kind of like this one. And that's where I listen to a song and I try to learn something from that song. And when I do learn something from that song, I think about it and then I share it. And I could learn anything from something about songwriting, underlying songwriting, top lining, production, mixing, and that's pretty much it. And so if I learn something, I'll share it with you. And today I was listening to Awolnation and their song Sail. And it made me think of something really cool that I wanted to share, and that was horizontal dynamics. It's just something that I'm calling horizontal dynamics. So in that song you have the vocals are panned wide and they're distorted, they sound nice and gritty. There might be stuff down the middle like reverb and delay, etc., but the vocals are wide. And then you have this really angry synth come in and it's straight down the middle. It's a centralized little bass and it's and and so you have this interaction between the wide vocals and this bass, and it's like oscillating. And I thought that is so cool to have that kind of horizontal interaction between parts in a song, between the two main production elements of the song, the vocals and then that synth, which is so masculine and aggressive. And so that made me think of something like horizontal dynamics. And so let me kind of introduce what horizontal dynamics is, but from something that we're more familiar with, which would be vertical dynamics. And don't get carried away with the terminology here. Dynamics is just change. It's like change in time. So if I'm talking about vertical dynamics, I'm talking about things changing in time along the vertical axis. And in music production, or in music, that's going to be your frequency spectrum. Your vertical axis is the frequency spectrum down from the lower frequencies up to the higher frequencies. And then the horizontal axis is just going to be basically your stereo field. You know, you have your left and your right monitor or speaker. And so it is interesting to point out that the horizontal dynamics really only make sense in the context of having two speakers. It doesn't make sense in the context of a mono environment. So you have to have a stereo environment. Okay, so looking back at vertical dynamics, there's two ways that we can have vertical dynamics that I was thinking about. One would be continuous and the other would be discrete. Now again, don't turn the video off because of this. These are just high school terms. A discrete continuous function is just one that's kind of smooth. A discrete function would be something that's a little more like, you know, choppy. And so let me give you two examples. Continuous vertical dynamics would be something like a riser in an EDM, where you're going boom, and then it drops, right? Or the opposite would be a downshifter or something, where it's going psss. But essentially what that's doing is it's starting at the high frequencies and continuously moving down the vertical axis. Okay. Now the interesting question is, how do we use these dynamics, these vertical dynamics and horizontal dynamics, in emotionally impactful ways, right? And that's what I found so interesting about Sail by Awolnation, is that they use the vertical dynamics and the interaction between those two production elements in an emotionally impactful way. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. An example of discrete vertical dynamics would be something as simple as a kick and a snare. A kick, for the most part, is the bulk of the low-end information. So you have like a doom, doom, and then you have a snare, which is supposed to give you the more mid-range aggressive frequencies, the punch. So boom, pa, doom, pa. And so that's an example of discrete vertical dynamics. Okay, you have the low, high, and so it's dynamics because it's changing over time, and it's vertical because it's really just dealing with frequency content, low, mid, and yeah. And it's discrete because it's non-continuous, to be tautological. No, but it's discrete because it's separate elements. They're separated. Okay, there's a distinction, a precise distinction between them. And so those are two examples of continuous vertical dynamics, which would be risers, downshifters, for example. And you also have kick and snare, for an example of discrete vertical dynamics. And so you can have the parallels in the horizontal domain. You could have, you can imagine something just being panned continuously between the speakers. That would be an example of continuous horizontal dynamics. Or you can have something that's discrete, right? A good example of using both vertical and horizontal dynamics in a continuous vertical dynamics and discrete horizontal dynamics. This is kind of complicated, but if sometimes EDM will have a riser going, and then right before it breaks into the break, I guess, it starts taking that riser and chopping it up in the horizontal field. So while it's still rising continuously, it's being broken up and being panned in sporadic ways in the stereo field. And so that's an example of using vertical continuous dynamics and discrete horizontal dynamics. And when you get right before that break, what it does is it creates a lot of instability. When you have the breaking up in the stereo field of that riser, when you have that discrete horizontal dynamics and it's kind of chaotic, you get a lot of instability, so that when the beat drops, it's just like bringing everything home. It's just landing on stability, and that is just an amazing example of tension, creating an insane amount of tension and then releasing it, which is ultimately the point of this video. How can I use horizontal dynamics or vertical dynamics in a way that's emotionally impactful? And that's an example, one of creating tension and then releasing it. Okay, and so I think that the example of Sail by Awolnation is a little more complicated, and I haven't figured out exactly why the discrete horizontal dynamics in that song is so emotionally impactful, but it certainly probably has to do with release, tension and release, right? Because you have the wide vocals and it opens up the middle, and then bam, it just lands in the middle with that bass. The wide vocals and then whew. But really this video is just introducing a production concept, one that I find very new, interesting, and I've never seen anybody else talk about it before, at least in the way that I'm presenting it, and that is horizontal dynamics. How can I use continuous or discrete horizontal dynamics to make my songs more emotionally impactful? And a song that I think is awesome for this and worthy of study is Sail by Awolnation. Now there's probably tons of other songs, and I'm not really going to go do the research right now. This is just something that I was really interested in and wanted to share with you. And so go definitely listen to that song and listen to the interplay between the vocals and that bass that comes in the middle. I think it's fascinating. And I'm going to probably listen to more songs, and if I ever hear an example of horizontal dynamics being used in an emotionally impactful way, then I'm definitely going to share it in another video. So look out for future videos, guys, and until then, work on your craft.